Research and Information Skills. It's week 12, the penultimate week for the semester. This week I'm going to have a look at, or maybe an excursion into ideas and its connection to research and ultimately to knowledge, and how the three, I guess in some respects, are circular, how they combine, and hopefully, from my perspective at least, indicate to you that you can change the world through your ideas. The outline for this week covers such things as what research gives us, I guess in a very general sense, but also you specifically in terms of assignments, etc. But also, I guess that's the defence for the unit, or part of the justifications for this unit. I'm going to briefly look at the research process and how research builds knowledge, and move on to how, when we accumulate knowledge over time, we begin to generate new ideas about different subject areas. And finally, and not least, how ideas can change the world, and there are many that have done such things. In terms of the PowerPoint this week, I've obviously included a whole range of things that I normally do. However, there's a couple of things I'd like to focus on, and perhaps if I needed to summarise what I've done this week, and certainly more about a personal statement about me, on slide 3 I put a cartoon, and I mean, you may have seen through obviously the different aspects of Milo itself, the pictures I include, that I'm interested in art, and I'm certainly interested in cartoon. In fact, that was going to be my preferred profession. Somehow inevitably I became an educator, which I'm not sure was always the right choice, but anyway, I do enjoy the latter, of course. Anyway, if you have a look at slide 3, for me that more or less sums up me and my life, and I guess these things are always personified, they're always subjective in that sense, but there's been many times that I've been out on long walks with my dogs, and sat there wondering about different things, and inevitably they flop around, play around, jump around as I'm sitting there pondering the world. And it always strikes me that dogs seem to have it so simple, and maybe their take on the world is the right one. Keep it simple, keep it happy, keep it straightforward. Now, sadly, we can't do that with this lecture this week. We've got to, I guess, immerse ourselves to some extent in aspects of knowledge, the realm of ideas, and how we might change the world. So on slide 4, I look at 4 reasons why we might actually need and use and have to utilise research skills. Of course, if we quickly read through those, I don't want to bore you too much with them, but obviously the first thing we do, and I'm hoping the whole course or the unit itself has kind of offered this, is that we can locate the best sources of information that are available to us on a particular subject. The second is that we can do that efficiently. The third is that we can apply the research in many different ways, not only our kind of academic life, but also perhaps in our social life, depending on sort of what groups or associations or affiliations we have. But also just personal needs, or personal information needs, I should say, that should be qualified, in the sense that, when we're looking for a subject, just say we have an atom of curiosity about something, we can quickly investigate it and find out whether it's worth exploring. And the last one is the fourth, and I think perhaps the most interesting thing, and the thing I want to, I guess, try and focus on this week, is the world of ideas. Is that the more we read, the more knowledgeable we get about something, and inevitably that generates ideas about the subject we're investigating. And for me, that's crucial. That's important. Slide 5 indicates, I guess, the broad dimensions of research skills and how it can impact on those. And those 4 quadrants, critical thinking, analysis, dissemination, and problem solving, are, as far as I'm concerned, fundamental to any work we do at university, and are all important in their own right. I don't necessarily want to and need to go through those. I think they're fairly self-explanatory. But for me, critical thinking is perhaps one attribute of being trained academically that I've found to be the most useful in every realm, every sphere of my life. However, in more practical terms, if you look at slide 6, we're talking about assignments, and inevitably, as a student, right through postgrad, you have to use information in certain ways, usually to produce something that can then be marked or assessed and graded, which means ultimately you can go up the line. So you become part of the academic enterprise, and ultimately, hopefully, get promotion up through the ranks. simply get to enter the profession or vocation that you want to. On slide 7, I give you a graphic about how research as a process occurs and how that is transformed ultimately into knowledge and then, more importantly, into application in the real world. And I think it's the latter stage which is the crucial bit of any research process. Sometimes research is done for its own sake, but more often than not it's to solve a problem, i.e. Say for instance we're looking for a cure to a particular illness, for instance, and we could call illness in that sense a problem. And then we go through a whole phase in research to find out some sort of solution or a cure to a particular condition. So it's the application end that I think is the most accessible to people. People aren't necessarily that interested in the process itself unless they're actually the people looking for those particular things, but it's the outcomes that I guess the general public in that sense are the most enthused about. And the reason, of course, that is because they can see it have direct benefits to not only to themselves but to other people around them. Before moving forward, I guess we have to have some sort of working definition of knowledge. And as I've said to you guys several times, I think, throughout these recordings, is that whenever you're using terminology, you should always define it in some way, even if it's done in a fairly curt, circumscribed way. You should define your terms. And that demonstrates not only your understanding of a particular concept, but also indicates, when you explain it, indicates what that concept or how that concept is being used in the context of your work. But anyway, knowledge itself, if you have a look on slide 8, relates to an understanding gained through experience or study know-how. In other words, that as we study, we gain, I guess, more information, and it reaches a critical point of knowledge. There is a difference between knowledge and necessarily intelligence and memory, although they both feed these. And I've suggested there that that intelligence is the capacity to acquire and apply knowledge, thinking and reasoning, and obviously the ability to understand and use language, for instance. And memory is an adjunct to that. It's the ability to store and retrieve relevant experience and is part of intelligence. So we need these facets, these aspects of knowledge building, and certainly of the brain, to actually generate and create and build and construct knowledge. Anyway, critical to today's discussion is slide 9, and it literally in a sentence, in the discussion between information and knowledge, I suggest that information becomes knowledge with questions like, what implications does this information have for my final decision? So a simple question is an appeal to the knowledge that we personally have about a particular subject, and we have to make comment or we have to make a decision about that particular thing. And knowledge in that sense influences our decisions, and the more knowledge we have, usually the better informed and better our decision, or perhaps more rational, more logical our decision. On slide 10, I drop in the knowledge pyramid, two aspects of it. The smaller one, which is what I actually know, or as a representation of what I might know. A larger chunk, what I know I don't know, in true Donald Rumsfeld terminology. And the bottom bit of the pyramid, the base of the pyramid, what I don't know that I don't know. So in other words, all the information out there that I've not accessed, that I've not in any way been privy to, or perhaps I've excluded myself from, for instance. And I guess it's significant in the sense that if we look at ourselves in that diagrammatic form, that it's only the capstone, which represents our limited layer of knowledge. And there's so much more information and knowledge out there that we could acquire, if we had the time, and perhaps even the mental thrust or repository. The bigger pyramid, which is the coloured one, which is for me a fairly interesting representation of knowledge and how it's built and what it ultimately comes to. In this case, we start with just information or discrete elements in terms of data, so we can look at almost anything in life and say, okay, we have a certain layer or level of knowledge about something, so we collect mental data about that particular things. When we process that data, usually it becomes information, so we can talk about a category, so it's categorized in that sense. We can then talk about aspects of the category, for instance, and we start making connections and links. Knowledge, which is deemed to be mental application, is one step removed or one step higher from information, where we look at the information we have and how it, I guess, how it can be combined and analysed in that sense, and then how that information can then be used in a way of actually gaining some sort of application, in a sense, that we know that certain links, certain connections exist, and what does that mean in its entirety? What the whole area of information on a particular thing mean? Moving up to wisdom, which is much more arcane, I should say, much more difficult to, I guess, articulate in that sense, because what is wisdom? But I'll let you decide what wisdom is, because for me, wisdom is the ability to look at things and know many, even the opposing views, etc., to a particular suggestion or a point, and then realise that actually it's that any position in a sense is okay, or you can understand how that position is arrived at. Not necessarily agree with it per se, but you can understand, I guess, the arrival point. So it's a bit like reading an essay, that even though you might put in a whole lot of points that perhaps I disagree with, in fact I might even disagree with your conclusion, that I can still understand how you arrived at the conclusion. Now arguably that's logic, but I would also contend that in a sense it's wisdom. It's being able to look at other people's perspectives, other positions, other arguments for particular things, and I guess coming to a more mature position about. By mature, I simply mean more objective, perhaps. Now, the activity on slide 11, I think, is fairly important for all of you to consider, because knowledge in this sense, and it's a very personal thing for all of you, very subjective, is, for me, encapsulated in those three questions. You started somewhere a year ago with probably a fairly limited knowledge about what university life was like, and then I guess the three questions that I pose really are about you, how you've dealt with it, and what you've understood, particularly about study and how you study, and what that might mean for your future. And genuinely, I hope you all consider at least the questions. It'd be good if you could actually make some sort of contribution on the discussion board, because other people, I imagine, would be very interested in your views, because they've all been through the same experience. Pairing this lecture right back to, I guess, the starting point for each of us. Generally, it's curiosity that generates any sort of interest in a subject. And what we do, of course, is when we're curious, we usually investigate things. And like the proverbial cat that I've put there as a graphic, I think most of us, certainly with the availability of the internet, get tempted to look up things or look into things. And usually, if it is of interest, the more we hear, the more we want to hear, in that sense. So for me, like I said, it starts and we build knowledge accordingly. We may do an exhaustive study, we may not. We may simply do a very superficial search, for instance. When we do take a subject serious, as you'll see on slide 13, we might even begin to actually look at some of the issues or challenges that beset a subject area, and with the intent of solving them, not in a grandiose way or even a conceited way, but simply that we're interested in a puzzle, and perhaps we do have something to offer, a voice, an idea, and so we pursue that. And as far as problem solving goes, who else or who other than you or me or anyone else can solve a particular problem? All it takes is the right kind of experience, the right knowledge, the right voice to begin taking a tact or a tract on a problem. Now, slide 14 suggests another activity, and I guess for me, what this indicates is, I guess, your initial understanding of a subject area, particularly the one that you want to go into to study, because you will encounter all the problems and issues when you do go into that. Anyway, what I'd like you to do, if you could, is think about how the subject area that you're looking into has changed in the last 50 years. So where was it 50 years ago, for instance? Then projecting into the future, what you think will happen over the next 50 years. What sort of changes? Will they be dramatic? Will they be incremental? What sort of changes may happen for the next 50 years? And the last thing I want you to consider is what you see as the principal agent of change in the future. What is the thing that's actually going to change or transform your area of study? To give you an example of this, if we look at the study of history, for instance, 50 years ago, most of us would not have seen primary texts, or primary artefacts. We would maybe see photographs. We would more likely to be reading secondary sources, so historians commenting on certain events or certain artefacts, etc. Bring it right up to today, and we've got the digitisation of material that's available in museums. So a lot of primary artefacts have been photographed digitally, and those artefacts are then made available via the internet. So I can actually look at primary sources for information rather than relying principally on secondary sources who, obviously had the luxury and been lucky enough to actually have access to the primary sources. Into the future, what may happen? I suspect, personally, I think that historical artefacts, whilst they'll still be retained in museums, etc., they may be more, well, certainly made more available over the internet, for instance. But I think personally that there will actually be, I guess, not so much in a fictional sense, but genuinely an attempt to build, I guess, film-based reconstructions of what the past was like that we may be able to even go into in a holographic form. So I'll actually be able to experience history literally, in the sense of feeling like I'm there. So I'll be able to walk through these landscapes, these reconstructed landscapes, and get to feel history, so live history in a sense. So classes may simply be about going into an environment like that, feeling and experiencing some of the emotions of being in a historical place at that particular time. Now, the question is, of course, what's going to happen in your discipline, your subject area? You tell me. Moving on, to slide 15, I apologise for the wall of text. I know it's aesthetically not necessarily very pleasing. However, I think the quote is worth considering. Beveridge is a chap that I admire. I think his book, The Art of Scientific Investigation, is perhaps not given, I guess, the place that it should be in some respects. And I think, if nothing else, he offers a range of alternatives for how we might generate ideas that will hopefully transform the world. And anyway, you can get from the quote what you can. I should also say that the book is actually available in PDF form. I believe, I haven't read the PDF form, but I downloaded it. I believe there is some errors, typographical errors, etc. in its form, but the fact that it's free and it's available would suggest that it's worth a look at. Anyway, do with it what you will. On slide 16, I offer just a small selection of things that have transformed and changed the world, and all began as ideas. It may not always be easy to track or trace the origins of an idea, but inevitably a human being somewhere literally started with an idea about how something might be either invented or constructed that would simply change how we do things. And the ones that I offer there, some of which are fairly major, in fact I'd argue all of them are fairly major, have had dramatic turns. And I pose on slide 17 onwards, onwards as far as slide 19 anyway, the evolution of communication. And of course they offer a cartoon, but, I apologise for that. However, if we look at how communication has developed, questions like, which were obviously used to solve problems and answer obviously questions that underpinned the ideas that went with them, was things like how could we communicate better, instantly, cheaper, for instance, more efficiently, and so on. And those have been realised certainly in the last 50 years or so. I'd argue certainly the last 200 years we've had different modes of communication, and obviously well before that too. If you look at even say native Indians of America, for instance, they used smoke signals over great distances to talk to other tribes, for instance, which again is fascinating within itself. I mean, I guess a more broader and philosophical question is why the need to communicate in the first place, and this fascinates me. Why do we seem so keen to communicate with each other? Is it simply that we are a sharing race in that sense? We need to communicate, we want to be communicated to, for instance, we want to understand what other people are experiencing and what they're doing. but that's a question for another course, another unit. Anyway, on slide 19, I put in a graphic, for instance, that actually outlines some of those changes across time. So there's a chronology of adaptations to the communications industry. I apologise for the slightly cropped picture. It's actually from Google and Google Communications. It's an advert for their new devices for communicating, and I inevitably cut that off. Perhaps that was disingenuous to them, but I was more interested in the actual physical resources that went into it rather than them actually trying to promote or sell a product. Moving directly to slide 20, talking about academic knowledge. So in its most, I guess, truncated form, most concise form, academic knowledge is built over time, and I'm going to have a look at the graphic and hopefully you can make some sense of it. But however, in its most basic form, it's a process that starts with a problem or a question. It's analysed and researched, from which findings are offered in answer to the original problem. So it's a kind of formal process that you go through. It certainly eliminates, obviously ad hoc developments in terms of knowledge. Obviously information is verified over time. The findings are scrutinised and analysed and verified in the end, or validated in that sense. Perhaps the most important aspect of knowledge in academia is it's fostered by, have a quick look on slide 21, it's fostered by obviously developing evidence to support views, analysing situations carefully, etc., weighing alternatives, and I think this is important, and so on. I think those are fairly indicative of the attempts to be objective in terms of how we collect data, how we analyse data, how we then interpret that data, and then what work is then produced as a result of that data, of that information in this sense. And for the most part, this is a formal process that has certain steps, and one of the primary steps in, I guess, the beginning of working out what knowledge you need, or what sort of level of understanding you need in a subject area, is done formally through a literature review, which, if you have a quick look at slide 22, there's a whole, there's a graphic there that indicates different reasons for why we might do a literature review. Obviously that follows on to slide 23 in a much more formal sense, but the kind of things that we identify when we do a literature review, aspects like key sources, the main theories and concepts in a particular area, how knowledge is structured or organised in a particular topic area, what opinions, what definitions do we need, etc. And as I say, on slide 23, the key thing is to find out whether there's any gaps in the literature, which we're hoping to fill by doing our own research. Obviously, if we don't do a literature review, we might simply be repeating other people's research, which is something that's timely and obviously costly. And if we're generating similar results, then, like I said, it's repetition that's done for nothing other than the fact that we didn't look close enough to begin with. There's other aspects there into why we do it. I won't necessarily labour them here because it's not necessarily that important, but the point is that we generate or we build knowledge through a literature review. We have a look at a subject area in depth and discover a whole range of aspects of things, and people in a particular subject area, and then we can work out whether not only our idea but perhaps even our research proposal, whether it has validity, and whether it has any sort of novel value, because inevitably that's what research needs to indicate to some extent. From the literature review, obviously we do research, and here's another one of my cheesy cartoons to indicate that. However, if you look on slide 25, we have a much more kind of formal diagram of what the research process entails. I'm hoping that's fairly self-evident in terms of not only the direction but also the different steps in the process. On slide 26, I very briefly, again in diagrammatic form, look at how, once we've done research, and how that ultimately can influence decision making, both in a political, social, health, a whole range of areas where research uncovers certain, practices practices or certain substances or certain things that can be utilised in different ways, and we need to make decisions about those things, and research helps us make those decisions. Okay, inevitably, if you look at slide 27, it's about you, and it is genuinely my hope that all of you, not only that you're inspired to some extent through your own readings, not through necessarily this unit, but that you're inspired to crack on with your own ideas, your own beliefs, your own ideals about a subject, and with any luck, you will change the world. Everyone has to start somewhere, and I'm a great believer in this power of positive thought, power of self-belief, even if you don't necessarily always believe in yourself, but the belief that you can make a difference. I'm a great advocate of that. Anyway, on to more boring matters. Obviously, assignment 3 is due Friday the 11th of October at 4 p.m. If you could hopefully all make the deadline. Like I said, extensions are incredibly difficult, so if you are getting into difficulties, start communicating now, and then maybe there may be some small allowance allowed, but we are sticking pretty much to the deadline. Anyway, have a great week, and look forward to speaking to you finally next week for the evaluation of the unit. Anyway, many thanks. Have a good week. Bye.